Is China Marxist is probably one of the most frequently asked questions I get, whether it's on YouTube or on TikTok. People hear that China has reestablished capitalism. They hear people call it state capitalism, and then there's those who call it Marxism or just socialism. So this is a huge, tough question to answer, which is why I haven't answered it on TikTok till now. I've been planning on making a video. And in order to help my video, I'm gonna play a clip from the Qiao Collective. Hopefully I'm not butchering that name, I probably am. But they interviewed Vijay Prashad, and Vijay Prashad is one of the greatest academics in the world, probably the best communist academic living right now, or historian, Marxist historian, according to me. Michael Parenti is alive too. He's one of my favorites, but he's a little too old to be out there doing his thing. I think Vijay Prashad offers brilliant analysis about everything. This is his book, The Darker Nations, which is about the people's history of the so-called third world, and their battle against capitalism and their battle against exploitation and imperialism. So he was asked this question, is China Marxist? And he gave an absolutely brilliant response. I'll link the video in the description, but let's just watch a part of it right now, and then I'll give my thoughts.
I think the question, has China restored capitalism? Is China socialist? I think these questions are wrong because they are, in a way, non-Marxist questions. You know, what is a non-Marxist question? A non-Marxist question is something this or that? You know, you want a direct answer. It's what you might call the the kind of black and white, yes, no, these binaries, that's a one framing. I mean, the Marxist tradition is a different tradition. We believe human history takes place through a series of difficult contradictions between aspirations of people, their social relations, the forces of production that, they inherit. These things are in a certain tension. Then there are inherited traditions. I mean, we have historical materialism is a very rich tradition of understanding how change takes place, just because there's a revolution doesn't mean the next day there's communism. That's not how it works. I mean, when the Soviet Republic was formed, the first 10 15 speeches of the leadership that you can read, whether it's not only Lenin but the people who set up the medical things, the children, they're all struggling. How do we start a process of socialist construction? It's a process. It's not an event. A revolution is both an event and a process, but socialist construction is a long process. So the question of advancing productive forces, it sounds harsh. Maybe I don't agree with everything that is done, but I understand the argument is real. And inside China, there's an enduring argument about how far do you go. And you can see Hu Jintao, Xi Jinping, every moment there is recalibration. Chen Enfu wrote a brilliant piece about the different schools of thought in China. He's a senior scholar in the Chinese Academy of Social Science, ran an institute in Shanghai, wrote a brilliant piece saying there's many schools of thought. There's even people, and he dismissed them, who are Jeffersonian liberals, and he names them. These are the people. There are neoliberals, he says, in China. Yes, there are all these people. There are Maoists, because there's a debate. And here's the irony, is that the Chinese intellectuals are telling you, we have debates. There's a range of opinion. Some of them we don't agree with. From outside, they are saying there's no freedom of speech. So I don't get it, guys. I mean, either there's no freedom of speech or these Chinese intellectuals are lying.
That is what I call using dialectical materialism in your thinking, right? Not just dialectical materialism means we have tribal society and then feudalism and now we have capitalism and then we're going to have socialism, right? Dialectical materialism as in seeing things in their totality and seeing the inherent contradictions within things. And then the idea that socialism is something that's built, right? It's not an event, it's a process. I think that's a genius way of putting things. And I hope that showed you guys why I admire Professor Prashad so much and why I have his book. Maybe you'll think about checking that out. I mean, he's got like 30 books. Red Star Over the Third World is another one I really recommend. The Darker Nations just happens to be one that's allowed to be taught in Western academia, right? It's mostly focusing on countries in the third world, right? Whereas some of his other work talks about the Soviet Union and China, and that tends to make Western academia a little bit more angry. Even what he says in this video would probably make most Western academics very angry, despite the fact that his response is so well reasoned and clearly, not entirely biased towards Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. So the first thing he says here is that the Marxist tradition is different, right? We don't have these yes or no questions. Is China Marxist? I can't just tell you yes or no. I can't answer that question in TikTok comments the way people want me to, right? Because China had a communist revolution, and ever since the communist revolution, there has been a debate by the Chinese Communist Party, which is now a party nearly 100 million members, with lots of different factions, as Vijay Prashad says there. But they're also a country who have brought 1.4 billion people out of poverty, right? So what they've been doing is trying to build socialism. And in the 70s, under Deng Xiaoping, that meant opening up to foreign capital, right? And you hear him talk about this constant recalibration that's going on. Oh, we have a little too much wealth inequality. Oh, the private sector is getting a little too big. You saw recently there was a move to nationalize Alibaba, or at least break it up, to break up Jack Ma, this multimillionaire. Despite the fact that people say China doesn't still have a dictatorship of the proletariat, I mean, you don't see the US government threatening to nationalize Amazon. I mean, that's something that's unheard of. And it's because, in many ways, the workers are still in power in China, which is what we consider Marxism to be. But then they do have this private market with these billionaires, right? Because they're trying to establish socialism by 2050, and they're doing that based off of China's conditions, which prior to the revolution were conditions of horrible colonization, horrible exploitation, and acts of imperialism by the West. And now you're seeing a lot of people in the West who call themselves leftists, who are totally disparaging of China. No, they're not Marxist at all. They're a horrible authoritarian distortion of Marxism, and we should sanction them. You even have leftists calling for sanctions, right? This is exactly what the US State Department wants, and it's exactly what we're not supposed to do as Marxists, right? Because you're not supposed to look at something and go, this country bad, I want to sanction it. The US should fix this country with intervention, or this country should fix themselves. Well, China's got a million different problems and a million things they're doing well, and there's a constant debate within China about what to do with their country. So do you see how it's chauvinistic then for the leftists in the US, the most imperialistic, capitalistic country in the world, who has been siphoning wealth out of the global south for hundreds of years, to look at China, a country which is in the global south, by the way, and say, we're going to tell you how to run your country. You better stop doing these human rights abuses or we're going to put sanctions on you. Right? That is a job for the Chinese proletariat. That is not our job. Our job is to have a revolution in the US so they can stop imposing capitalist neoliberal hegemony on the rest of the world. Right? So I have written down here his idea of socialism as a process. And you see a lot of people with these romantic views of what Marxism is, right? He talks about increasing the productive forces in order to bring people out of poverty. And we know there's environmental concerns, right? We know there's wealth inequality concerns with China having a giant bourgeoisie who, of course, exploit the people who work for them. However, this is to bring themselves out of poverty, right? And I didn't play the clip, but Vijay brings up Pol Pot. In Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, maybe they got close to establishing a socialist mode of production, but they made everyone equally poor, right? And Vijay is clear. The idea of socialism is to increase, the well-being and the standard of living of the exploited masses, of the proletariat and the working masses who are subservient at this point under the economic system to the bourgeoisie, right? The idea is to increase their standard of living, which China's done. They brought 1.4 billion people out of poverty. Right? Would you rather, and of course we have our critiques of that, and there's a constant debate and recalibration going on, but would you rather have them do what Pol Pot did? Would you rather have them massacre people en masse to make everyone equally poor and kind of live communally? I mean, that's not what Marxism is, and that's the only way you could get that kind of view of Marxism is by being an idealist in the West, right? Tomorrow we're going to abolish the commodity form, right? Those jokes we make. Joe Biden's going to abolish the commodity form. Even if we got a staunch Marxist in a position of president, and in all the positions of government, we still wouldn't be able to just abolish the commodity form, right? Because building socialism is a process, not an event. Eventually maybe we'll abolish the commodity form and reduce the division of labor and completely abolish the bourgeoisie. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. And if you read Chinese academics or even their president, as Vijay Prashad is saying, that's their goal, right? Is to establish socialism by 2050. But their goal before that was to raise everybody in the country out of poverty by 2025. And now they've done that ahead of time. It was 2025 or 2030. But, and people see me holding this up and they're like, well, why would I read Xi Jinping? That's biased, right? He's just going to be biased in favor of the Communist Party and China. Why would I read him? One, U.S. corporate media is biased. They just lie about it, right? They say, we're coming at this from an unbiased, objective perspective, and then they give you, the opinion of the American bourgeoisie and the imperialists. Whereas with China, you know what their biases are. It's the president of China. Of course, he wants China to develop and be a great country. But when you read that book, you realize that a lot of what he does is self-critique. I'd say like at least a fourth of the book is him critiquing China and saying what they can do better and acknowledging the debates, including, in Xinjiang, the area where the Uyghurs have their autonomous zone, right? And this, in the US, I feel like we have this conception of Xi Jinping, and Vijay Prashad mentions this too, if you watch the whole video, as just this emperor, this ruler, this kind of racist conception we have about China, where everybody's just subservient to Xi. And that's not how it's working, right? There's 90 billion people in the Communist Party. As he said, there's Maoists, there's people who side more with Deng Xiaoping, there's Marxist-Leninists, there's pro-Soviet Marxists. And then you have even Jeffersonian liberals and neoliberals. And of course, there's the Falun Gong in China, this kind of far right-wing cult. And he says that some ideologies aren't allowed by the Chinese Communist Party, right? Ideologies like fascism that they consider to be too heinous. And if you want to have the argument that those opinions should still be allowed, okay, we can have that argument, but don't look at China and go, there's no free speech. Because that's racist, and that proves you have no idea what's going on in the country. Because as he says, the academics are having these arguments. They're having these debates, and then you have the Westerners come in and say, oh, look at China, authoritarian top-down rule. The U.S. better come in and intervene. Leftists or people in the West who we wouldn't expect that from, right? People who call themselves socialists who are at the same time calling to sanction China. And it's such a chauvinistic view, right? And I think it shows the psyche of American imperialism. And he talks about one of the ways to know that China is still moving towards socialism is to look at how many hours their people volunteered, right? He brings up some number, there's something like 400,000 people volunteering in China to make hand sanitizer and masks. Whereas he says in the US, if you get 6 people together to do mutual aid, it's a great thing. Because in industrialized capitalist society, we don't even know how to volunteer, right? Because our labor is seen as something you need to sell, right? Why would you give up your labor for free when you could sell it and pay your rent and put food on the table, right? Whereas in China, people are volunteering hundreds of thousands of hours during a pandemic to help their fellow man. So we in the US are looking at China and saying, horrible, anti-socialist, not real Marxism. Meanwhile, our country is an imperialist death machine, and in their country, they're in zero wars, and they've combated the COVID pandemic. They have people volunteering to help other people. They brought 1.4 billion out of poverty. And of course, we have our critiques of China, right? But is that really your place as a Westerner to make one of your main points critiquing China? Is that really needed right now? Are there not enough critiques of China in the U.S. mainstream media? Do socialists really need to be piling on China? I mean, and it's fine to critique them, but do so with a level head, right? Do so understanding you live in the American empire, right? So if I get on here and I critique China, I'm going to say, yeah, but I still don't support sanctions. I still don't support invading them. I still don't support meddling in their affairs. I might have critiques of the fact that they have a bunch of billionaires and a proletariat who work for those billionaires, and I think that should eventually change. But I'm not going to come out here and say China, evil authoritarian police state, the U.S. needs to do something, because that serves imperialism, which is not what we want if you're a real leftist. And like Vijay said, just read Chinese academics, right? there's a great debate going on in China between a lot of really, really, really smart people. And it's a racist view to look at China and think that they can't have these debates, right? To think that we, as the Westerners, need to tell China how it should be done. No, we need to fix our own country, because our own country is an imperialist death machine, right? Right? So say, you know, and it's not whataboutism. It's not. Because I'm not saying China has a surveillance state in Xinjiang and the U.S. has a surveillance state, therefore that's not wrong that China's doing it, right? I still disagree with the surveillance state. I'm saying that is the job of the Chinese proletariat to do something about that, and I can voice my solidarity with them, right? But my focus is at home and getting the U.S. empire to stop destroying every country in the global south for the extraction of wealth that's all funneled to the top, right? And to liberate the American proletariat, because that's where I live, you know, and I trust the Chinese proletariat to do their thing, and I have solidarity with them. And again, it's not solidarity with Xi Jinping. It's not solidarity with the higher ups. It's solidarity with the working class, right? And that's what I think is missed when you have Western leftists calling for sanctions on China, right? Then you don't have solidarity with their working class. You're saying the U.S. needs to impose something on the Chinese proletariat, and in reality, sanctions are something that's only going to hurt the Chinese proletariat. All right, so that's all I got there. I hope that answered y'all's question. I should mention that most of China's economy, their banks and their industry, I've said this before, are state-owned, right? So the things that Xi Jinping has his degree in Marxism-Leninism and finance capital, the banks and industry that Lenin says are what drive imperialism and drive the evils of capitalism, are still in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, which is likely why China is in zero wars. So that's the one last point I wanted to add there. So check out that video from Vijay Prashad and also the account that uploaded it. They're great. They're always talking about China if you want a more nuanced and non-Western, non-imperialist perspective on China. All right, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.